This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's electric cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's enter the issue to our panel of experts. They include Chris Fitzsimon, Director of NC Policy Watch, former Representative Josephus Mavretic and former House Speaker, Howard Lee, former State Senator and former Chairman of the State Board of Education, and John Hood, Syndicated columnist and author. Well, we hope you've had a great Thanksgiving weekend. And on this edition of NC Spin, show number 996, we're going to ask our panel to talk about the continuing dismay and discussion over the NCAA decision on UNC. We'll talk about trash, about the growing garbage problems in our state, and suggest that prison problems might need some new solutions. Plus, we have some exciting news about the future of NC Spin, and we'll ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Let's get started. The Thanksgiving holiday is noted for being with family, the kickoff to Christmas shopping, and lots of football. But amidst the turkey leftovers, there's continuing discussion about the NCAA decision not to impose sanctions on UNC because of the paper classes at the school. But the association that accredits the colleges and universities has also sent mixed messages about whether it would take another look at the school. Joe Mavretic, essentially the NCAA said they wouldn't impose any sanctions or penalties on Chapel Hill because other non-athletic students benefited from the paper classes also. Was that decision justified?
Not according to every sports publication that I read. I think that they have scalded the NCAA, and properly so. And I think they've also scalded the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Basically, the reporting has been that UNC Chapel Hill has sold its academic soul for sports money. I think it goes much further than this because we continue to believe in this hypocrisy called the student athlete in football and basketball, maybe a little bit in baseball, but the student athlete concept, and this flies directly in the face.
Bill Friday has to be turning over in his grave. Howard, the big item of contention is that this is arguably the biggest academic scandal in the history of the NCAA, and the governing body of that of college athletics failed to enforce and stand up for academic integrity because of a technicality. Agree or don't?
Well, I don't know that I agree with that. I certainly think the NCAA is not in a position to insert itself into academic evaluations. We do have a sanctioning body that looks at academics, and they did come in, they did put UNC on probation, so it's not as if they got away without having some punishment. I really think, and I do think often of my good friend Bill Friday, who and I had many conversations about how athletics is driving the universities instead of academics. And I don't think the NCAA had any right to be engaged in the academic piece, but certainly the athletic piece.
Interesting, because they are supposed to be standing up for both the student and the athlete. John, a further concern is that the signal the NCAA sent is that you can do an end run around the rules and get away with it without a penalty. You think that might lead to further scandals? Other colleges might try to do this?
Well, the fundamental problem we have here is that NCAA is about athletic regulation. Other entities like the accreditation agencies are supposed to be about academic regulation or oversight. Accreditation, though, is kind of a joke in the sense that they don't really have any good options. They could either not accredit UNC Chapel Hill, which basically no one believes would ever happen. So it's not a very credible threat. Or they can put you on suspension, which is exactly what they did to Chapel Hill. What was the specific effect of being put on suspension? Nothing. So there aren't any credible remedies, credible penalties on the academic side. The athletic side, there were some credible penalties, but they argued it didn't have jurisdiction.
Chris, help me with this. Initially, UNC, the officials at UNC, came out and just agreed that these courses were academic fraud. Now, we understand that in August, when they appeared before the NCAA behind closed doors. They changed their position and stood behind the courses. Is there any explanation for that?
No, I think the thing to remember, this scandal was outrageous, and I hope it never happens again. I hope the right people, some people were punished. I hope that everybody who was responsible was held accountable. But the big thing that I think people don't understand, and we talked about it on the show a few weeks ago, the NCAA, when they were looking into this, realized that a lot of kids who weren't athletes benefited from these classes. So the whole argument, the whole initial case was, this is some big impermissible benefit just for athletes, which makes them eligible to make a mockery of their student athlete status. But it turns out there were a lot of kids who weren't athletes to take it. So the fundamental argument, that's not excusing anything. It's just saying that the NCAA, the way this case was structured, didn't have jurisdiction. And remember, what they found out, a larger issue, there are universities, again, not to excuse Chapel Hill, all over the country who do have specific classes that only athletes take, and they get grades, and they don't have to do any work. So the problem is much bigger.
Yeah, Joe, so far as it goes, when are we going to get to a point where we'll say most of the people, many of the people who are playing football, dribbling a basketball, perhaps maybe even hitting a baseball, are people who couldn't get into the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill were it not for the fact that they were athletes? And let's call it what it is.
Well, I don't think that's wrong. As a matter of fact, there are people who are extraordinarily good violinists who probably don't do well in calculus. There are people who are extraordinary artists who probably don't do very well in chemistry.
Don't they have to go through the same admission process?
But in chemistry. So what I'm saying is that if you have a particular talent, then you ought to be able to expand that talent at the university level. The university doesn't make any effort to do that. They simply just say they're student athletes and keep on trucking.
Yeah, Howard, we got to be fair in this discussion. UNC Chapel Hill has implemented 70 reform measures to ensure accountability and monitoring of academic advising and course content. Is that enough?
Well, it's hard for me to say since I'm not able to measure what impact that is having. I'm very upset at UNC for having gotten in this mess in the first place. I was always against these emphasis on paper classes, and when they created the AFM Studies program, which I don't think leads anywhere, that they put all of these athletes in. But I know that Chancellor Ford and the trustees have made a gallant effort to try and get a handle on this and not get back in this mess again. But we're going to hear it again.
I'm sure we are. John, I want you to comment on Tom Fetzer's comment. Tom Fetzer is a member of the UNC Board of Governors. And when he heard that the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools wasn't going to go any further with their investigation, he said he was nonplussed.
I think Tom would say he went to Wake Forest and therefore has a broader vocabulary.
I was going to mention that.
The people. I mean, the truth is, the best argument they could have made, it would have been less embarrassing if you think about it for Chapel Hill, is to say, we've never had high academic standards. We let Chris Fitzsimon and John Hood in. And they didn't have any talent.
And Joe Mavretic, among others.
But truthfully, I think that Fetzer and other members of the board, you remember that they are for the whole system. And there are lots of very angry people outside of the UNC Chapel Hill orbit who are in the UNC system who feel like Chapel Hill was treated better, treated differently than the other campuses would have been treated.
Chris, I've got to ask you, the flames have been fanned by the News and Observer. There's no question about it. I mean, all throughout the 3 or 4 years of this. How much of this is a case where the newspaper is out to make a name for itself and perhaps win some awards, and how much of it is actual
Well, I'm never going to criticize dogged investigative journalism. You can disagree with maybe how much time they spent on it. I think there are a lot of other things I hope the News and Observer investigates. I'm glad they investigated this, but we also need to be honest that part of the big disappointment and the reason this is going on is that other schools are disappointed who are rivals of UNC that they didn't get punished. I mean, that's really true. That's
and are probably doing many of the same things.
Maybe.
Yeah, well, we've got an important announcement for NC Spin viewers. NC Spin is moving to a new network and a new airtime following our broadcast on December 31st. Beginning Friday, January 19th, you'll be able to watch NC Spin on UNC TV's main channel on Friday nights at 7:30 p.m. and again on Sunday afternoons at 12:30. Your favorite panelist in the same balanced debate for the Old North State will be moving to UNC TV beginning Friday, January 19th, and we hope to see you there. More information will be available on our website, ncspin.com, or NCSpin on Facebook. And when we come back, we're going to talk some trash.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Agriculture is the backbone of our state's economy. It's the heartbeat of our rural communities. Its strength means bustling sidewalks and open signs in store windows. And with smart investments in our future, like the Plant Sciences Initiative and modern updated research stations, agriculture will remain the cornerstone of our economy. Because when agriculture is strong, our economy is strong.
For more than 45 years, the North Carolina Retired Governmental Employees Association has advocated for local and state government retirees. Whether protecting retiree benefits or fighting for cost of living adjustments, more than 70,000 members count on us to be their voice. Government retirees work for us, and we stand for them. Learn more at ncrgea.com.
We now return to NC Spin.
North Carolinians throw away enough trash each year to fill dumpsters back to back, lining the entire route of Interstate 40 in our state. We generate almost 12 million tons of trash each year, more than a ton per resident. Recycling can help, but our landfills are bulging, and getting permits to build new landfills is almost impossible. Our legislature got into the act with the passage of HB 56. While the lead story in this bill concerned Gen X, there was also tucked away a provision that addresses so-called flow control. The bill said that the county could not require garbage collectors in their county to dump in their government-owned landfill. However, according to this law, a garbage collector can dump in another county that might offer lower fees, and a lot of counties are worried this might make their landfills economically unviable. Advocates say they shouldn't have a monopoly to start off with. What do you think?
Well, I think if a county expends the funds to develop its landfill and, of course, manage that landfill, that it certainly should have control over it. But they are the ones who should be free to make the decision on not only who dumps in that landfill, but also the cost for dumping in that landfill. And if I were running the landfill, if it was under my control, I'd say the fees should be much higher for outside dumpers than for internal.
Joe, let's chase this rabbit for a second. Okay, so people can go to other counties and dump. What happens if my county's landfill just gets to the point where it can't pay its employees and so forth like that? Aren't taxpayers ultimately going to end up footing the bill for this?
I don't think so. I think you just had an indictment of the system of economics that we have in this country. If I'm sitting out here on County X and my fees are lower than County Y and people want to come over to County X, I'm going to jack them up to at least Y.
Okay, chasing that rabbit. So my county's landfill becomes so economically unviable, they close it. Now what am I going to do?
But the assumption is the worst case scenario. I don't think that's going to happen. I want to see trash haulers get involved in the money of recycling. I think there's a whole lot of treasure in trash, and I think if you leave it in private hands, you're going to get a better outcome.
Chris, the recycling program our state implemented several years ago is definitely having an effect, and it's reduced the demand, a lot of demand on landfills. But there's some things that we can do to improve that. One thing that Cullen Browder at WREL in these reports said that I'd never heard before is if you put your recyclables in a plastic bag and use it in total in a plastic bag, it goes into the landfill because they don't have the time to open it up.
Right, that's why you have to sort all your recycles. I don't think that's made clear to a lot of people. I do want to get back. One of the things you said in the question, which I thought was interesting, you said a provision tucked in an environmental bill dealing with Gen X. The fact that we are rewriting solid waste policy for local governments tucked into a bill in a special session with not even as much discussion as we've had here on NC Spin is a fundamental problem. This is a big deal and costs hundreds of millions of dollars every year, and we need a much more thoughtful process before we rewrite solid waste policy for local governments. Local governments were furious They didn't agree with the policy, but they also thought we should have a thoughtful discussion about it, which we did not. We did this in a special session.
Have some input into
Absolutely.
it. Chris, another thing that, John, another thing that we discovered in these reports from Cullen Browder, which, by the way, were excellent, and I encourage you to go online and look at, were that when we throw away the little plastic bags that we get our groceries and just about everything else in, they end up in the landfill, and too many times the operators have to go and pull these bags out, because otherwise they fly away and they litter our highways or they harm our animals. Is this something that Dare County tried to do away with, these little plastic garbage bags and so forth like that? Legislature came back last year and rescinded that law. What's your take on it?
Well, I'm glad they did. It was a silly proposal. It didn't make any difference, according to the studies that looked at the effects. Partly because it was only part of the county. It was only the barrier islands and stores that were using plastic, couldn't use plastic bags on the barrier islands. People could bring in bags from other places. Do they really seriously think we're going to have the only thing that would really matter would be a statewide ban on plastic bags? Try that and see what North Carolinians think. A better suggestion, a far more realistic and better suggestion, and people already do this, is to encourage people to reuse these bags. I certainly do. Yeah. We save pretty much, unless it has all junk on it, we save pretty much every plastic bag and reuse it. That's a very reasonable way to.
And most grocery stores have these bins where you can take your plastic bags and they'll take them. And of course,
you can, in many stores, you can get paper bags if you want them.
Howard, one of the problems here is that manufacturers have gotten to the point where their packaging is just way oversized, and
you can't open it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Some of it is because they're trying to prevent shoplifting, which has become too prevalent. But another thing is that so much of the product is being shipped in by freight, and so they got all these styrofoam, like a television set's got all these styrofoam parts. That all ends up in the landfill, doesn't it?
Well, most of it sure does, but we need to exercise some innovative creativity in how we manage all of this stuff that we want to get rid of. I've been impressed with a group called 1-800-JUNK. And you pile all this stuff up and they come pick it up, and I don't know what they do with it, but they get it out of my yard, and that was my only interest. And if we could have some more creative approaches on how we manage some of this, it would be very helpful too.
But these landfills have a definite life, Joe, and one of the things that Cullen pointed out was trying to site and open and get permitting for a new landfill is almost virtually impossible. Nobody wants one anywhere near.
Well, my son skateboards on Mount Trashmore in Virginia, and that does okay as an abandoned landfill, and we could do the same thing. It just seems to me that we're talking about re-educating people into not using things that are not recyclable, and that's a long-term process.
All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about prison problems.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Life's busy, but you are the master at managing it. Thanks to your know-how and some helpful tools. As a member of an electric cooperative, you have access to lots of innovative tools that help you better manage your home energy use and your budget, so you can stay focused on what's most important. Discover how your electric cooperative can help you control your energy use at EmpowerMeNC.com.
I help educate and inspire visually impaired students to strive for a brighter future.
I make sure visitors to the North Carolina Zoo take a walk on the wild side.
And I make sure that the fuel you buy is a quality product from pipeline to pump.
I support small businesses in North Carolina by matching them with hard-working, well-trained employees.
I make sure the roads you drive on are safe.
Scenic, the one voice speaking in support of the men and women who are making North Carolina great.
You sleep on concrete till your body get immune to concrete.
My mom got my brother and I up and said, come on, we're leaving.
I became homeless in the beginning of this year.
When I was about 4 or 5 years old, our house caught fire.
I used to see my brother. If he see me, he'd turn and go the other direction.
We did the only thing that we could think of, and we went to a Salvation Army shelter.
You know, we don't have this, like, what's your background look like? We just say, what do you need?
I remember the man from the Salvation Army coming down with a box of clothes.
The Salvation Army officer bought my brother and I an ice cream cone.
Last week, my brother walked up to me and he just started a conversation.
Today I've given my life to the Salvation Army because I remember what somebody did for me, my brother, and my mom over 30 years ago.
The Salvation Army for me means hope.
Compassion.
Family.
Support.
We now return to NC Spin.
From time to time, we enjoy reading letters to the editor in newspapers, and one recently in the Charlotte Observer struck us concerning problems with our prisons. The writer said, we're trying to solve old problems with the same old solutions. Instead of more officers, the writer said, we need fewer prisoners. Sounds like former Georgia Governor Lester Chambers. But he continued, U.S. prison rates are the highest in the world. John, let's start with the basics. We know that someone often is sentenced to prison and punishment for breaking the law, but also out of a desire to protect the rest of us from harm. Do we put too many people in prison?
Well, at the very least, we have to make sure we have enough room in our prisons for our politicians. We probably don't put enough of them away, and that would certainly protect us.
Most of them aren't violent.
Well, I don't know. But the truth is that North Carolina has already been reforming the system in a couple of ways. Back up several years ago, we passed some changes, and one of them had to do with parole violations. A lot of times we had people heading back into prison because they had violated the terms of their probation or parole. There are other penalties or remedies now being used for that to try to reduce the extent to which we aren't putting people in prison who are truly a threat to public health or to public safety or to property. I think that's appropriate. Our prison populations have declined in North Carolina quite a bit in the last 7-8 years. That's promising. It saves society a great deal of money and grief to put certain people in prison. It saves us money. But those are people who will otherwise commit multiple crimes, multiple serious crimes. They absolutely need to be in prison. There are other penalties we can use for other kinds of nonviolent crimes.
Howard and Joe, both of you guys were in the legislature when the feds initiated a lawsuit for us hot bunking prisoners, and it caused some prison reforms in North Carolina. But specifically, are there some crimes that we put people in prison for that we don't have to?
Well, I think the answer to that is yes, and I think if you look at other countries and see what their requirements are for incarceration, you would say we have too many crimes that require people to go to jail. There's also two sides of a coin, and that is recidivism and what you do in the prisons to reduce recidivism, and we don't seem to have a handle on that.
But it's obvious that we have too many people in our prisons because of the overcrowdedness is putting a lot of strain on the people who have to guard these prisoners as a result of the people who were killed in prison a few weeks ago. We underpay people. We expect them to be able to engage with these guys, and there are a lot of bad people in the prisons. If we had smaller populations in the prison and we paid our employees better, we probably could have a much more responsive outcome of the experience.
Chris, I remember when we appeared before the Sheriff's Association a couple of weeks ago up in Blowing Rock, and one of the things that they wanted to talk a lot about was how many mentally ill people end up in their jails and prisons. We just have never addressed this mental illness
No, and
situation.
as we talked about before the sheriffs, I was reminding them that we had a big mental health reform initiative responding to a court decision to try to keep people in the least
2001?
It was 2001, 2002, the least restrictive place possible, and the plan was let's downsize our hospitals and let's fund community services. Well, we did we downsized the hospitals, we never adequately funded the services. I do think we still have too many people in prison, but as John said, we're making a lot of progress. I'm a little worried the U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions seems to be a little bit stuck in the old days where we wanted to lock more people up. So I hope we don't have problems with the federal government stopping our good trends.
John, Senate President Pro Tem Phil Berger has formed a study commission to examine this issue of prison guard pay and safety and so forth like that. What do you expect might come out of that?
I think some significant action. Remember that conservatives have suspicion or skepticism about a variety of government programs, but not protecting public health and safety in the prisons. That is a high priority, or at least it should be, and I think that Republicans in the legislature will take it seriously.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we ask the panel to tell us something we don't know.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
The healthcare landscape is filled with questions and uncertainties of changes that are coming. In these times of change, there's one thing you can trust. You can trust your family physician to work for you, not only in treating sickness and disease, but also your overall health. Regardless of how healthcare might change, the men and women of the North Carolina Academy of Family Physicians pledge to work upholding your trust. Family physicians, your trusted healthcare advisors.
I help educate and inspire visually impaired students to strive for a brighter future.
I make sure visitors to the North Carolina Zoo take a walk on the wild side.
And I make sure that the fuel you buy is a quality product from pipeline to pump.
I support small businesses in North Carolina by matching them with hard-working, well-trained employees.
I make sure the roads you drive on are safe.
Scenic, the one voice speaking in support of the men and women who are making North Carolina great.
We now return to NC Spin.
Let's get to it and ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Howard Lee, I'll start with you.
Well, as I end this year, the Howard Lee Institute, which I set up 5 years ago to work with schools and impacting the lives of low-income students, I can say that during that time, I've been fortunate to have strong support from people, raising about $500,000 to support the program, and the success rate has been phenomenal in both middle and high school.
Good for you. Good for you. John Hood, tell us something we don't know.
Perhaps surprisingly, the election of Roy Cooper as governor to replace Pat McCrory does not appear to have derailed Medicaid reform, a big project under the McCrory administration. It's still on track. Probably will get federal approval, probably be implemented in 2019.
Chris, tell us something we don't know.
When the General Assembly comes back to town in January, the Senate's going to pass some sort of merit selection for judges. A lot of people think it's going to be more of a legislative selection. We had a luncheon this end of November. Retired Judge Don Stevens spoke out. A lot of former judges, Democrats and Republicans, are going to be speaking out heartily against that point.
Joe, tell us something we don't know.
LEAs have locally elected school board officers, and a few of them are beginning to worry that they don't have enough input into the policies and programs that are coming top down from the state.
You're talking about the local school boards?
Absolutely.
Don't feel like they have enough input?
Absolutely.
Interesting. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback, and read my weekly column, be sure to visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. And we want you to join us next week for a special program with a panel of experts discussing health care in our state. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Join us next week and get the spin on issues facing our state.